What if I told you that the monumental events approaching our world have already been foretold? This is not merely a matter of private revelation, nor is it confined to the hidden words of mystics and saints. It is written directly into Scripture and the very framework of creation itself. God has established patterns so precise and deliberate that to ignore them is no longer skepticism. It is willful blindness. Something massive is approaching, and the silence of the mainstream church regarding this reality is not a form of reassurance. It is a severe warning. Having spent decades studying spiritual theology, demonology, the nature of divine providence, and the testimonies of saints, I have looked closely at what was shown to these holy souls. They were granted visions of things that made them weep bitterly. They begged God to remove this knowledge from their minds, because the sheer weight of what they witnessed was completely unbearable. In my own ministry, I have sat with souls enduring the deepest spiritual battles imaginable, encountering a level of darkness that most people cannot comprehend. Through every confrontation, every prayer, and every deliverance, I have come to understand one fundamental truth. God never leaves his people unprepared. However, true preparation requires truth, and in this current age, speaking the truth has become the most dangerous thing you can do. What I am revealing to you is not speculation, nor is it sensationalism. It is a careful, theological, and spiritually grounded examination of what the saints, Scripture, and authentic Catholic tradition have been pointing toward for centuries. All of these prophetic lines are converging right now in our lifetime. Do not look away or dismiss these realities, because the souls who walked away from these warnings in the past did not get a second chance. This is your warning. To stay connected with these powerful messages, meant for those who seek truth and deeper understanding, it is vital to keep searching for insight and maintaining spiritual vigilance. There is a consistent pattern that God repeats across the entirety of salvation history, one that most people have never stopped to examine carefully. He warns, he prepares, he speaks, and then he acts. This sequence is not a coincidence of biblical narrative. It is a divine methodology and a signature of how the Creator operates within the framework of time and human consciousness. Before the Great Flood, Noah was given over a century of warning to build the ark and preach repentance. Before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham himself was informed of the impending judgment. Before the devastating plagues fell upon Egypt, Moses was thoroughly prepared and instructed. Even before the catastrophic fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, an event so brutal that the historian Josephus records over 1 million souls perished, our Lord gave his disciples a meticulous and explicit warning during his Olivet Discourse. He told them exactly what signs to watch for and commanded them to flee to the mountains when those signs appeared. The disciples listened, they fled, and they survived. The ones who did not heed the warning perished in the siege. We must understand something theologically precise here, because this is the foundation upon which everything else rests. When God warns humanity, he does not do so arbitrarily. He is not engaging in prophetic theater. Every warning God issues is rooted simultaneously in his justice and his mercy. His justice demands that mankind be given a fair opportunity to respond, while his mercy drives him to provide that opportunity even when, in his omniscience, he already knows many will refuse it. This is why the warnings always precede the events without exception. Consequently, when you begin to see these warnings multiplying, accelerating, and converging from multiple independent sources across multiple centuries, you need to pause and pay attention with the full capacity of your intellect and soul. What we are witnessing today is precisely this, a convergence of prophetic warning unlike anything seen since the 1st century. I do not claim to be a prophet, nor do I claim private revelation. I am a trained theologian, a Roman Catholic priest, a student of the mystical tradition, and a man who has spent his life at the intersection of spiritual reality and practical pastoral ministry. When I examine the authenticated mystics and saints of the Church, those whose revelations have been thoroughly vetted, approved, and found not to contradict the magisterium, a distinct picture emerges, and it is not a comforting one. Saint Hildegard of Bingen, whose writings were formally recognized by the Church and who was later declared a doctor of the Church, described a coming period of tremendous upheaval affecting both the Church and the world. She saw a time when the very structures of civilization would be shaken to their foundations. She spoke of a significant comet, catastrophic natural events, and a level of corruption within the clergy so severe that God would be forced to act with a severity not seen in generations. Writing in the 12th century, this medieval mystic described what sounds with unsettling precision like our present moment. Similarly, Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, whose visions were recorded by the poet Clemens Brentano and whose beatification was confirmed by Pope John Paul II, described the appearance of a strange, counter-church being built on a new plan entirely different from the one established by Christ. She described a period of profound confusion within the hierarchy, featuring the coexistence of two popes and a church being infiltrated, distorted, and hollowed out from within. We could easily dismiss this as the product of imagination, but Emmerich was a woman who bore the stigmata, whose condition was verified by multiple rigorous medical examinations, and who survived for years on nothing but the Eucharist and water while possessing supernatural knowledge of places she had never physically visited. These are not the hallmarks of delusion, and her visions align seamlessly with the broader pattern of divine warning, leading toward a necessary purification. Let us continue directly into what these warnings mean for the immediate future of the world. Beyond the visions of medieval and 19th century mystics, we must confront the reality of Fatima, an event that occurred in 1917 and cannot be reduced to simple folk religion. It stands as one of the most thoroughly investigated supernatural occurrences in modern history. The historic miracle of the sun was witnessed by an estimated 50,000 to 70,000 people. This vast crowd included hardened atheists, secular government officials, and journalists who had traveled to the site specifically to mock the event. It was widely reported in the secular, mainstream press, making it impossible to dismiss as mass hysteria. During these apparitions, the warning delivered to the world was incredibly specific. It was stated that Russia would spread her errors throughout the globe, causing wars, intense persecutions, and the literal annihilation of entire nations. The message revealed that the Holy Father would have much to suffer and spoke of a great chastisement. Crucially, this event could be mitigated, not completely avoided, but lessened, through genuine penance, prayer, and specific consecrations. Unfortunately, the world did not choose penance. Instead, society accelerated in the exact opposite direction. Now, we find ourselves standing at the precipice of the predictable result. The historical pattern remains unbroken. God warns, humanity ignores the message, and then the event arrives. As we look closer at this reality, we must recognize that the impending event does not arrive solely as a form of punishment. Rather, it comes as a profound purification. There is a vital, theologically precise distinction between divine punishment and divine purification. Punishment is strictly retributive, whereas purification is entirely medicinal. In His boundless mercy, the Creator overwhelmingly prefers the medicinal approach. What is coming carries within it the seeds of the greatest spiritual renewal the world has seen since the Counter-Reformation. However, to receive this renewal and to be part of it, rather than swept away by its force, you must be prepared. True preparation begins with a clear understanding of exactly what is approaching. To comprehend this fully, we must look into the interior lives of the great mystics, analyzing their experiences not out of mere curiosity or as a spiritual entertainment, but as a serious theological exercise. The insights granted to these souls carry an evidentiary weight that the modern mind consistently underestimates. We must ask ourselves why God would choose to show a human soul such terrifying realities. If you understand the true nature of mystical experiences, you realize that God never grants visions simply for the emotional consolation of the recipient. He does not show a cloistered nun the potential collapse of human civilization merely to keep her informed about future events. He reveals these dark realities because that soul is intended to pray. Her prayers, her personal suffering, and her total oblation of self, offered in direct response to what she has seen, enter into the spiritual economy of grace. This intentional offering produces real, tangible effects in the material world that no purely natural force could ever achieve. This is the classic theology of reparation, and it provides the absolute key to understanding why the mystics were shown these heavy visions. Consider Saint Faustina Kowalska, whose personal diary has become one of the most widely read spiritual documents of the modern era. She describes a vivid vision in which she saw an angel preparing to strike the earth with a divine chastisement. Distressed by the sight, she began crying out to the Holy Trinity, imploring mercy for the world. Before she could even formulate her own thoughts, she found herself uttering the exact words of what is now known globally as the Chaplet of Divine Mercy. As she prayed, she witnessed the angel lower his arm, rendered completely powerless to execute the impending punishment in the face of that intercession. We must read that account with immense care. A powerful angelic being was stopped from executing a global decree by the fervent prayer of a single nun in a Polish convent. This dramatic encounter illustrates the theology of intercession in its most literal form. It delivers a message of critical importance. The exact timing and the overall severity of what is coming are not rigidly fixed. These outcomes are modifiable because they respond directly to human prayer. The future is an ongoing invitation to participate in the unfolding of divine providence through our own freely chosen spiritual offerings. This reality helps explain why almost every major mystic wept when shown a coming purification. They did not weep because they lacked faith, nor did they cry out because they doubted the supreme justice of God. They wept because they could see with crystal clarity what the people around them were completely blind to. They saw the true spiritual condition of contemporary souls, the profound numbness, the constant distraction, and the absolute indifference to the transcendent. They understood with terrifying clarity that the vast majority of people were completely unready for what was coming. Saint Padre Pio, who bore the visible wounds of the stigmata for 50 years, was a living testament to this reality. His condition was verified by numerous skeptical physicians who noted he lost extraordinary amounts of blood daily from wounds that naturally should have been fatal. Ebilocated, read the secrets of hearts, and cast out darkness, yet he was known to weep bitterly inside the confessional. He did not weep over the sins he was actively absolving. Rather, he wept for the souls he could see who would never enter that confessional. He wept for those who would die in a state of complete alienation from their Creator. He once stated that he felt himself melting away like a candle before a flame when he contemplated the sheer number of souls who were on the path to being lost. Padre Pio lived through the bulk of the 20th century, witnessing 2 world wars, the rise and fall of brutal totalitarian regimes, and the dawn of the nuclear age. He saw all of that horror, yet looking further forward into the future, he still wept. What he saw was a systemic shift in the human condition that requires an entirely different level of divine intervention. We will look closely at this structural shift as the narrative continues to unfold. When analyzing these prophetic insights, it is vital to maintain a cautious theological perspective. In discussions regarding the future of the world, a common temptation is to move too quickly from authenticated spiritual history into the realm of popular, unvetted speculation. An enormous amount of sensationalized private revelation circulates rapidly across modern digital platforms and within certain traditional religious circles. It must be stated clearly that not all private revelation is genuine, and the faithful are never under any formal obligation to believe these accounts, even those that have received local ecclesiastical approval. However, as rational and discerning observers, we can look closely at the remarkable convergence of what has been consistently authenticated across multiple centuries, distinct nations, and varied spiritual traditions. When we examine this collective data, we must ask what overarching picture it paints for our generation. The reality that emerges is a portrait of a world that has moved into a state of apostasy, possessing a depth and breadth with absolutely no historical precedent. We are not merely witnessing individual lapses in morality or a temporary culture of vice. Human history has always been marked by periods of cultural decay and widespread vice. Instead, what we are observing today is an institutionalized apostasy, a structural rebellion embedded directly into our laws, our educational systems, our medical ethics, our media, and our academic institutions. Furthermore, this destabilizing confusion has increasingly manifested within the very administrative apparatus of the spiritual institutions tasked with guiding humanity. This systemic inversion is precisely what caused the ancient mystics to weep so bitterly. They did not despair simply because human beings were committing sins, as humanity has struggled with failure since the dawn of time. They wept because the very frameworks explicitly designed to call humanity back from the brink of moral destruction were being systematically dismantled, distorted, and inverted from within the culture. When a society no longer produces any sense of shame for destructive behaviors, and when the legal apparatus no longer reflects the objective moral order, the entire foundation shifts. When schools cease to transmit basic spiritual truths, and the traditional concept of the family is actively redefined out of existence, you are no longer dealing with a typical bad season in the history of fallen human nature. You are dealing with a reality that is qualitatively different from anything that came before. Logic dictates that God responds to qualitatively different historical conditions with qualitatively different interventions. This necessary divine intervention is the exact reality toward which history is accelerating. To navigate this landscape without falling into confusion, we must examine the specific signs that mark the moments immediately preceding such a monumental event. According to the historical sources we have been analyzing, these indicators are not vague or ambiguous. They are highly specific, measurable, and actively unfolding all around us. To properly interpret these developments, we require a robust framework for discernment. When discussing the signs of an impending divine event, the immediate temptation in our hyper-connected digital age is to either catastrophize every world event, or dismiss everything out of hand as mere coincidence. Neither response is rational, and neither is spiritually productive. The historical tradition has always acknowledged that the Creator communicates through the observable signs of the times. In historical scripture, religious leaders were sharply rebuked, not for their lack of secular knowledge, but for their inability to read the spiritual atmosphere. They could easily predict the weather by looking at the color of the evening sky, yet they remained completely blind to the profound spiritual movements happening right in front of them. This ancient rebuke applies directly to our modern world. The primary sign demanding our attention is the complete collapse of what can be termed a sacral culture. A sacral culture refers to a civilization that is consciously ordered toward the transcendent, where the public square, the legal system, the structure of the family, and the educational institutions all point toward a higher moral law. Global civilization, despite all its historical flaws and historical injustices, was originally built upon this transcendent foundation. The physical architecture of the past, the traditional calendar of feast days, and the very rhythms of historical life were deeply embedded in this shared worldview. The natural moral law was explicitly encoded into the legal traditions of the world. Today, that foundational structure is not merely weakened or slightly damaged, it has been completely erased from public life. What replaces a sacral culture upon its collapse is never a neutral, value-free secular space. Instead, it is invariably replaced by an actively anti-sacral culture. This new iteration does not simply ignore the transcendent. It consciously constructs an alternative reality, built entirely around the absolute sovereignty of the individual will, the aggressive rejection of objective moral truth, and the progressive dismantling of every traditional institution. We are no longer living in a passive, post-traditional age. We are living in an actively anti-traditional age. This distinction carries immense weight, because history demonstrates that while much is tolerated during times of passive ignorance, a civilization that takes the historic benefits of truth and weaponizes them against the truth calls forth a completely different response from divine providence. This civilizational shift sets the stage for the secondary crisis, which occurs within the spiritual institutions themselves, leading to a profound crossroad for humanity. The secondary sign that cannot be ignored is the profound crisis unfolding within the institutional church itself. We must address this reality plainly, speaking not from a posture of bitterness or triumphalist opposition, but from a position of deep pastoral and theological concern. The contemporary landscape reveals a severe crisis in the priesthood, widespread vacancy in the episcopate, and a doctrinal confusion that has been allowed to proliferate at the highest levels of institutional administration. These structural fractures, accompanied by liturgical disruptions and the loss of a coherent catechetical voice, are not incidental administrative problems. They cannot be repaired with better corporate programs, public relations campaigns, or endless synodal consultations. They are the clear external symptoms of a deep, systemic spiritual sickness. This institutional vulnerability is precisely what was shown to the saints who received visions of a future church in crisis. Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, St. John Bosco, and the Venerable Bartholomew Holzhauser all described this exact scenario. They did not merely see a church facing normal historical struggles, they saw a time when the human structures of the institution would become so deeply compromised that only a direct divine intervention could possibly restore her pristine character. Consider St. John Bosco's famous prophetic dream of the two pillars. He saw the ship of the church violently assailed by terrible storms and surrounded by enemy vessels seeking to sink her. The ship only finds safety and survival when it successfully anchors itself to two distinct pillars rising from the sea: the larger pillar of the Holy Eucharist and the secondary pillar of devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. This vision is not merely an inspiring piece of religious imagery, it is a precise theological roadmap for our times. The message is clear. The human and institutional structures surrounding the ship will be battered beyond recognition, but the core of the faith itself, anchored securely to the sacramental life and the protection of heaven, will never sink. Understanding this reality allows us to face the third and most commonly overlooked sign: the simultaneous explosion of occultism and demonic activity across modern Western culture. Having spent decades engaged in deliverance ministry and being present during intense solemn exorcisms, I have encountered the demonic in terrifying forms. These experiences would easily shatter the faith of anyone who has not been theologically prepared to comprehend the true nature of what they were witnessing. From this first-hand experience, I can state with absolute certainty that the sheer volume of demonic activity in society today is categorically different from what it was even 30 years ago. This change is not a change in kind, because the devil's core strategies never change. The adversary is completely uncreative and highly repetitive. What works to destroy human souls in one century is simply recycled in the next. The difference today is a matter of scale, scope, and the sheer number of souls who are actively opening themselves up to darkness. Through widespread occult practices, persistent grave violations of the natural moral law, and the total abandonment of the sacramental life, millions have exposed themselves to severe demonic influence and obsession. The mainstream cultural explosion of witchcraft, modern divination, neo-paganism, and what now openly presents itself as organized Satanism in popular entertainment, fashion, and public ritual is not a coincidence. It is not merely a passing subcultural trend. From the objective perspective of classical demonology, this mainstreaming indicates that demonic forces have been granted an increased latitude of operation within the material world. They are invariably granted this expanded freedom when human beings, through their own free choices and deliberate apostasy, consciously open spiritual doors that were previously sealed shut by centuries of faith. This reality forces us to ask a difficult theological question. Why would a just and merciful Creator allow this darkness to increase so dramatically? The answer is uncomfortable but necessary to understand. Divine providence allows the demonic to exercise increased latitude under two specific conditions: when human sin has reached a saturation point that calls forth a just response, and when the appointed time for a massive global purification is rapidly approaching. Therefore, the visible increase in demonic activity is not just a primary cause of the coming upheaval, it is also a definitive sign of it. The darkness always intensifies to its absolute peak immediately before the dawn, and it rages most violently, precisely because it knows its definitive defeat is imminent. This is the unvarying pattern observed within the individual soul during an exorcism, and it is the exact pattern playing out across the grand scale of human history. The enemy fights hardest when his time is shortest, pulling humanity into a grand spiritual conflict that leads directly to the core event heaven has foretold. Let us examine the precise nature of this approaching supernatural intervention. We now arrive at the absolute core of what must be addressed. After laying this extensive groundwork, analyzing the pattern of divine warnings, the explicit testimony of the mystics, and the rapid convergence of cultural signs, the fundamental question every serious soul must ask is, what specifically is coming? We must answer this with the highest degree of precision, because how you conceptualize this approaching reality determines exactly how you will prepare for it, and your preparation dictates whether the event becomes a painful catastrophe or a healing purification. Across centuries of authenticated private revelations and the unvarying testimony of the great mystics, there is a consistent description of a global event known by various names: the warning, the illumination of conscience, or the great purification. The illumination of conscience, most famously detailed in the mid-20th century accounts but echoed by numerous historical saints, refers to a specific, instantaneous, supernatural event. During this moment, every living soul on earth will experience a brief, unmistakable suspension of normal time. In this state, individuals will see their entire lives exactly as the Creator sees them. Every hidden fault, every secret malice, every grace refused, and every opportunity to love that was deliberately squandered will be made completely visible. This accounting will not occur at the moment of physical death, but while the person is fully alive. The underlying purpose of this event is not condemnation, it is supreme mercy. It is an extraordinary supernatural intervention designed to grant every single soul one final, undeniable, and experiential encounter with absolute truth. Because of this event, no one will be able to claim at the end of their earthly journey that the truth was hidden from them, that they were never warned, or that the reality of the moral order was impossible to know. From a strict theological perspective, it must be stated that the Church has not formally defined the illumination of conscience as a matter of binding dogma. It remains within the realm of private revelation, meaning the faithful are not under structural obligation to believe it. However, the internal theological coherence of this concept is absolutely remarkable. It aligns perfectly with the dual nature of divine providence, which balance perfect justice with perfect mercy. Before an epoch-defining act of global justice, it is entirely logical that an extraordinary act of universal mercy would be extended to a blind and distracted humanity. Conversely, the secondary aspect, often described as a material chastisement, is an event of a completely different order. Multiple seers across different eras have described physical events of immense magnitude, including cosmic disturbances, sudden natural upheavals, and social collapses that follow if humanity fails to respond to the initial illumination of their consciences. Some historical mystics have even detailed specific periods of physical darkness during which ordinary human security will completely fail, leaving the faithful with nothing to rely upon except their prior spiritual preparation. Does this mean you should panic, stockpile material goods, or focus entirely on physical survival? Absolutely not. The physical aspects of a crisis are never what truly endanger a human being. Humanity has survived material catastrophes beyond imagining throughout history. Cities have burned, plaques have emptied continents, and entire empires have vanished overnight. The physical body may perish, as the historic records of the martyrs clearly demonstrate that physical survival is never the highest human value. What is truly lethal is being caught in a state of spiritual nakedness. The real catastrophe occurs when a soul is caught in a state where the comfortable illusions, the modern distractions, and the pleasant rationalizations of daily life are instantly stripped away, leaving them face to face with the reality of eternity without any reserves of divine grace. If a person has built no habit of prayer, maintains no sacramental life, and possesses no genuine interior life, the sudden confrontation with truth becomes an unbearable disorientation. This is precisely why every authentic message from heaven never commands the construction of physical bunkers or the accumulation of material wealth. The universal directive is always entirely spiritual. Return to the sacraments, engage in heartfelt penance, anchor your daily life in deep prayer, and clear away the habits of sin through honest confession. Through decades of pastoral ministry, I have discovered a profound practical truth. The individual who has developed a disciplined, authentic, and daily interior life remains virtually unshakable in the midst of a crisis. This stability does not exist because they have achieved human perfection, but because they have built the necessary spiritual muscles. When the external framework of modern comfort collapses, and it will collapse in some form for everyone, through the natural course of life and history, their relationship with the transcendent is what remains. To prevent you from building this foundation, the adversary has deployed a highly sophisticated strategy. The enemy is fully aware that his operational time is severely limited, which has triggered a massive acceleration of fury in our cultural landscape. Yet, his primary trap is not an open invitation to gross evil, which you would easily recognize and fight. His real strategy is far more dangerous. He wants to keep you perpetually distracted, slightly anxious, thoroughly entertained, and completely comfortable. He wants you to remain vaguely aware that something is wrong with the world, yet too spiritually sedated by the rhythms of modern life to ever take definitive action. We must break through this sedation immediately. The ultimate vulnerability for millions of souls in this hour is not a deliberate hatred of the truth, but the dangerous illusion of a delayed conversion. The adversary has invested massive spiritual resources into the middle ground of religious complacency. The people who stand to experience the deepest, most shattering disorientation during a global purification are those who consider themselves vaguely spiritual, who identify with the faith by tradition, but who have never allowed that faith to cost them anything. They have lived under the assumption that they will naturally deepen their interior lives whenever the hectic pace of modern life finally slows down. When the external, comfortable world is suddenly disrupted, this superficial identity will collapse under its own weight. To keep souls locked in this trap, the enemy frequently deploys his final and most devastating weapon, the temptation to spiritual despair. As you look out at the staggering scale of modern apostasy, the institutional crises within spiritual structures, and the aggressive normalization of darkness in public life, the natural inclination is to conclude that the situation is entirely hopeless. Despair masquerades as realistic evaluation and clear-eyed intelligence, but it is actually a profound failure to trust in the absolute sovereignty of the Creator. History provides a brilliant lens to correct this modern distortion. In the late 16th century, traditional spiritual institutions across the Western world had been utterly fractured. Vast territories had entirely abandoned historical orthodoxy, and from a purely natural perspective, the total collapse of the ancient faith appeared completely irreversible. Yet, precisely during that dark hour, quiet individuals were working in the streets of Rome to transform lay culture, new religious societies were launching unprecedented global missions, and contemplative mystics were completely reforming ancient monastic traditions from within. None of these historical figures operated from a posture of despair. They possessed an unshakable confidence that the ultimate outcome of human history was held securely in divine hands. The coming global purification is not a defeat for the truth. It is a profound civilizational reset. It is the moment where the transcendent breaks into human history to establish a definitive boundary against chaos. The great mystics who wept over these visions did not cry out in hopelessness. Their tears were the fruit of an intense, sacrificial love for the souls who would suffer needlessly due to their own stubborn indifference. Beneath their grief lived a deep, rock-solid, and theologically grounded hope. Your practical assignment in these coming days is to step completely out of the cultural sedation and begin your own personal preparation. Do not wait for a dramatic external sign to alter the course of your daily life. The blueprint for your spiritual safety has already been delivered, tested, and proven across centuries of salvation history. The daily rule of vigilance. True readiness is built quietly, through small, unyielding habits, when the world is still calm. Establish a fixed daily prayer rule. Do not leave your interior life to chance or emotional whim. Commit to a dedicated time of focused, silent prayer every morning and evening without exception. Frequent the sacraments. Seek out regular, thorough confession to keep your soul entirely clear of compromise, and receive the Holy Eucharist with profound reverence and frequency. Practice intentional detachment. Intentionally disconnect from the endless loop of digital distraction, media noise, and superficial anxieties that are explicitly designed to keep your mind numbed. Live in a state of reparation. Offer your daily trials, inconveniences, and personal sacrifices in an active spirit of intercession for the conversion of souls who are currently blind to the reality of what is approaching. The event that is coming will ruthlessly strip away everything that is artificial, superficial, and false in our culture. It will bypass the public personas we present to the world and the comfortable lies we tell ourselves when life is easy. It will leave every human soul entirely face to face with absolute reality. When that moment arrives, your material wealth, your social standing, and your secular anxieties will matter less than nothing. The only reality that will endure is the depth of your authentic faith and the genuine charity alive within your soul. Do not squander the time you have been granted. Break free from the numbness, anchor your life to the transcendent, and stand completely ready, because the dawn is coming, and it will find you exactly as you choose to be.